Hello, podcast listeners. Doug here. Well, normally I don't introduce a podcast episode with a foreword, but for this one, I wanted to share a bit of the background. I recently attended Homecoming, which is an annual event hosted in the home of Jim McCarty by the L&L research team, which includes Gary and Austin, Jim, Tricia, and Joanne. I gave 2 talks, which were entitled The Archetypes of Mind and Spirit, a Counselor and Theological Perspective. And the second one was Stillness in the Storm, or Swept into the Maelstrom, an exploration of the disclosure movement. So here are the caveats and the reason for this foreword. In the first talk I'm posting here, my archetypal talk, I unfortunately ran out of time and didn't get a chance to talk about the spiritual archetypes according to the Law of One. I really focused in on the archetypes of the mind. However, if you'd like to listen to my reflection on the spiritual archetypes, you can by following the links to my blog in the show notes, which feature the slides I used in the presentation, as well as the podcast links to listen in. So well-formed and solid. My humor is typically just right there between the first and second chakra at all times. Just why I love relating to 3-year-olds, but when they get older than that, they're mature, too mature.
You need to look for a younger crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hi everyone. Before I get started on this one, I don't see, you must have walked over there. Tomorrow I'm giving a talk on some of the material that she actually talked about will tie into a lot of the talk that I'll be giving, but more on the macro scale as it relates to disclosure. And I actually will be talking specifically about George Patton as an example, so that was pretty cool that she had mentioned that. As well as on my blog, I have an article on George Patton that looks at him from a Law of One / psychological perspective to flesh out a little bit about what that might mean to harvest towards the positive but decrease in harvestability, which seems like a paradox. Oh, there you are. So that was a neat tie-in, and that's what I'll be definitely using him as an example tomorrow. It's already built into the talk. Yesterday, when whoever said you skip session 75 to 106, or skim over it because it's the archetypes, and everybody kind of came in, got me to chuckle because I certainly understand that. And about 1.5 years ago, I felt like I was ready to dive in to the archetypes. And one of my gifts in this incarnation is I'm a counselor, a mental health counselor. I have a master's in theology. And the way that I process information is twofold. One, it's visual. And 2, it's how can I verbalize this in a presentation to people that is somewhat digestible. I don't know why I do it, but I've been doing it since I was a young kid. I've always been kind of a teacher in this way. And having said that, I'd like to just acknowledge right off the bat that what you're going to get today is Doug Scott distorted. So there's an extra layer of distortion, like a nice butter over bread that you're going to get today. So all I'm hoping to do, to be honest with you, is give you, from my perspective, a counselor theologian's view of a map of the archetypal mind, where then you take that and you go to whatever degree you want to and look at the archetypes, but maybe have a bit more access to it, because you kind of see how the pieces fit. a little better. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to give you today. What I want to say right off the bat is I will likely be speaking fairly quickly because there's a lot to talk about. But we have all kind of weekend to unpackage some of this if you want to. Number two, I'm recording it. And if anybody at the end of the recording, if you had said something and you don't want it on there, please just come. All I got to do is click that part and delete it, and it's gone. But I have a podcast, and so this will go into my podcast, which is already connected to the blog. And Gary will, or maybe I, send out the link to the blog that will have the podcast in it of what we're talking about today. So you'll have all the slides. It's already online. And you can just have that if you wanted to move into this again. Okay? My background really quickly is I have a master's in clinical social work and a master's in pastoral theology. And the nexus of spirituality and psychology has always been very interesting to me. What I'm going to offer you today is really what conventional counseling has been saying lately. Which isn't surprising, it shouldn't be, because if it's true somewhere, if it's really true, it should be true everywhere. And I think what is helpful now is to re-engage with the archetypes from a 21st century perspective, building upon the body of work that's already kind of being brought out in counseling world and theology world, and seeing how it's already congruent with the metaphysics, really, which is a perennial metaphysics. It's something that's always and everywhere true that we see from the law of one. Okay? So here are all of the archetypes, and I'm here to tell you that if this talk is not about looking at each one of those archetypes and getting in the fine details. That's something that I do explore later on. I will explore later on in the future. Time-space has already happened, but space-time with my blog and so on and so forth. But what we're going to actually be talking about is looking at the archetypes in a way that positions them in a flow of energy. And that's kind of, because if you can get the flow and if you can get the shapes inside you, putting on that energetic shape over you, then you'll have access to just go right on in and see how they all kind of work. Both as a ding-on sitch,
Thing in and of itself.
thing in and of itself, and also in relationship. Okay? So instead of those beautiful Egyptian images, this is what we're going to work with, which shows you just how biased I am. Neat circles and squares. Today, we're going to actually talk about the archetypes of the mind and the archetypes of the spirit. The archetypes of the body it's just too much to pack, and that's not something I'm going to show too much on today. But, the body is a creature of the mind, so you probably can just inverse the matrix of mind and get the body. But the archetypes of the mind, the order that Ra talks about is matrix, potentiator, catalyst, experience, significator, transformation, and great way. All right, yep. The golden dew. And Ra says that the archetype 22 shall be paired with the significator. So you're going to see that in my presentation, how it's often paired with the significator. Okay? The archetypes of the body, I use the same symbols because they do mirror the archetypes of the mind. And when I mean archetype, think of it as architecture. Blueprint. Outline. Okay? Cookie cutter. Make 100 different kinds of Christmas cookies. You're going to have an archetype. There's the star one. Here's the Santa Claus archetype. And there's 7 archetypes for the mind and 7 for the body and spirit. Now, with the archetypes of the spirit, they look a little different because they are indeed at once macro, so that if you can think of Russian nesting dolls, the archetypes of the spirit is the biggest one. The other ones fit inside. And they're really kind of just based on the infinite creator's experience, which is the mover and the moved, the mover and the moved, positive and negative, male, female principle, just over and over. That's all. That's the whole experience. Okay, the talk's done. But that's the whole experience of the one infinite creator. And it gets nuanced. I like to use the word nuanced when I'm not talking to a law of one group, because distortion is distorting sometimes. But with you guys, I can't say distorted, and you guys get it. It's kind of the black darkness of the soul, the potentiator, the sudden numinosity, the catalyst, which is faith, the candle. The experience is lit by moonlight. The transformation is one's stage, not state. If you're familiar with Ken Wilber, one's stage, a permanent movement forward in consciousness that is ever and ever greater. And lastly, the great way, which really can be summed up as the Ankh. The Ankh, the Ankh. In Texas, we say Ankh, but hell, y'all. And the word metanoia, does anybody know what that means? Metanoia.
The term?
No, metanoia is the Greek word that was translated into English as convert and repent. So in the Bible, there's a lot of baggage that goes with repent and convert, isn't it? It's shame. There's a lot of shaming there. But that wasn't the original word, and it certainly wasn't the original intent. Metanoia means change, so metamorphosis. Noia is heart-mind. It's the ability to see the world with your heart and then change it in terms of expand. That's actually what metanoia means. And that's what transformation means, metanoia. And that's what we hope this talk is going to do a little bit, is metanoia, is help expand a little bit on the metaphysics that we have. Okay? And ultimately, it's only good if we can put it into practice a bit. So that is what hopefully we'll get to towards the end, is what does this look like? But I think if you get the energetics of it, you're going to have an experience of what it means for you. And that's the goal. So here's how I've arranged it. And there's the way I've arranged it will come very clear later on, but I want it, this is a dissonant note, and then eventually it'll move into a beautiful resolution, which is the harmony. So you're going to be thinking, why did he arrange it this way? There's meaning for that. I'd like you to see that the experience, the catalyst, and the potentiator as more or less in the unconscious. And the matrix and the significator is more or less in the conscious mind. And there is a dotted line between, and I've done that, semi-permeable dotted line, because that's what Ross says. It's a semi-permeable line that one can have access to the unconscious. So there's not a hard and fast, this veil of forgetting. And so first off, I'm setting up the difference between the unconscious and conscious mind. Yeah. Yes, that's a little nuanced. Let me just give you just a quick definition of the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. Okay? Just so you have an idea of what we talk in counseling, what that looks like. The conscious level are things that we think we're conscious of. The subconscious is, we know it's there, but we're not ready to look at it. We have some sense. For example, your experience of racism, but when you were able to actually process that was when you were ready to process it. But it was held in the subconscious for a while, and then it comes up into the conscious. The unconscious, and if you can think of an iceberg, it gradually gets darker as it goes down below the water, ranges from, I know it's there, but I kind of don't, and it's that murky gray, to all the way down here, I don't even know what I don't know. That's the deep unconscious. Okay? The matrix of mind is activated by the potentiator. And it's linked by the significator. So I'm giving you some definitions here. Now remember, you don't have to pay attention to all of the words because it'll be in the link that you have. All right? Think of the potentiator as a soda bottle that's shook up. It's being built up. Pressure's being built up. And it taps the matrix. The matrix responds. But who or what archetype is the archetype that decides what to do with the response? That's the significator. For those of you who understand Spanish at all, significar, significado, or significant, signification, maybe in English, meaning. The meaning maker. Ra talks about the significator as that archetype that decides what to do, what to seek, why to seek, and what the heck are you going to do once you found what you're seeking? Who does that? Which archetype does that? What portion, what energetic quanta of consciousness does that? That's called the significator. It has to make meaning of all of this stuff that's being given to it. And the significator, that's why I have it sitting up here. You can think of it like a head upon the neck of the matrix. The significator through the matrix then does action in the world. Okay? What is the original thought? The original thought of the Creator, according to the law of one. Just the experience, the desire to seek experience, to know oneself. That's the original thought. At the very beginning, the primal logos is I desire to experience myself. So I want you to think of this as the out-breath. But then, what is the original desire?
To seek and to become one.
All entities seek and become one. That's the in-breath. Or if you like the positive, the negative polarity. Not negative in terms of like a moral negative polarity, but just the magnetic. Or you can think of, if you're understanding a light as an electromagnetic phenomena, the electric is out, and then the magnetic part is a drawing in. The heart's the same way. You see, to be honest with you, we all have to go through this. People who usually get attracted to the law of one start to be attracted to all things esoterica. And you're looking for the hidden wisdom in the inner world. It's okay. But I'm here to tell you that, well, without throwing that away, I think the more you dive into that, the more you realize that everything in the conventional world is a full expression of the macro. It's a full expression of what you're going to find in the hidden world, too. So, for example, the heart, that's the law of one. The breath, that's the law of one. And the significator of both the logos and ourselves is outward. I want to experience myself. inward, there's an automatic movement inward. And the significator is the one that makes meaning of your desire to express, and then when it comes in, to process. See? Express and process. And third density beings do a lot of expressing, very little processing. Okay? But the original thought, original desire, that is also the whole of the law of one. Okay, experience of mind, remember this is in the unconscious, is the archetype that includes all the biases and experiences garnered in past lives and in the present life and in the deep mind. The deep mind includes not only your mind, but the racial mind, the planetary mind, the archetypal mind, the deep mind of the logos, and the cosmic mind. There's these levels of greater and greater expansion. That's what Ra calls the deep mind. And all of that can be packaged up. I started to think of the experience archetype as a big old library. Well, Jim's library, where it's sorted. This are these biases. This is how I'm going to experience these things, and all of them are stacked up. So there's a librarian that lives in the experience archetype. And the librarian will give information to the catalyst archetype. The catalyst then gives it to the potentiator. It's like, I got a hot message I got to give to you. And the potentiator starts to shake it up and gives it to the matrix. The matrix gives it to the significator, and the significator says, aha, this is what I'm going to do. And all of this happens within a split second. But you can kind of see the flow and function. Okay? Ross says, all that assaults your senses is catalyst. But it ain't coming from our conscious mind. So even if you are feeling the wind, and you're saying, I feel the wind, you might think that's external, but the way that we actually acknowledge that the wind is flowing is it passes through the unconscious to the conscious mind, to the significator, which then thinks the wind is flowing. So it's always this sense of anything external happens and it's received through the unconscious, comes up, processed, and then out through the significator. That's the flow of it. Like how many people, if you're like me, now I see a lot of meaning in a lot of different things, but like when you were talking about your sense of forgiveness, remember that moment of 10 minutes and everything? Does anybody know what happened? Does anybody see? In the outer world? I mean, out here? You didn't? I saw some people. Yeah, there. It was like at that moment, all these golden leaves start falling down, like exactly at that moment. And it lasted maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and then it stopped. But that's just the wind doing it. Now, how did I process that? My own bias. I went through the experience into the catalyst, and we're going to talk about how all these flow. It was catalyst. The catalyst feeds into the experience, then the catalyst then again revs it up, gives it to the potentiator. The potentiator pops it up into the matrix. The matrix then says, it's here. The email has arrived. Did you get it yet? Oh, yeah, now I got it. The significator says, what am I going to do with it? To me, it was like, hey, Ra, you must be listening. And there's a little bit of Ra right here. Right on the computer. You see what happened there with my archetypes? All right. Now we're going to talk about the flow. I thought this would be funny. The flow chart, the mind-body-spirit complex, a.k.a. person. I know, it's careless of me. Reference, you know. It's a Ra joke.
I heard it.
It's R-A and R-A-W. It's both, probably. But anyways, Ross says, a person that you so carelessly call a person. That's why it's funny, but ha-ha. My humor is like raw. It's so dry. It's like arid Arizona in the middle of the summer. Nosebleed. We have number one. So from my perspective, it's the experience. No one comes in here without experience. No one. Because even if a person is a newly minted third density being coming from the second density, what are they bringing into this incarnation? Biases. And Ra clearly talks about their second density biases. That's already experience, which already then offers a subtle lens or bias to the way people then approach reality. Okay, so everybody has an experience. Experience is given to the newly minted third density being. Now these are, or to even a wanderer. You come in here with a bag of experience, an already archived library. Past lives plus karma, racial mind plus karma, planetary mind plus karma, the archetypal mind of the Logos. Now the deep mind of the Logos is even more expansive than the archetypal mind, but Ra does talk about how there's biases in the deep mind, including kindness, opposable thumbs, monogamous relationships between male and female from the second density. These are just biases that Ra talks about, and they were picked up as part of the deep mind. Then there's the cosmic mind of the Logos, which I said earlier, it was original thought and original desire. Those two things are the whole force, the out and in breath, the aorta and the what? Well, the heartbeat, out and in. Everything is the out and in, positive and then pulling back. So that's the bias of the cosmic mind. So the experience then feeds the catalyst archetype. The archetype, the catalyst archetype, feeds the potentiator. The potentiator archetype taps the matrix. The matrix gives it to the significator. The significator, down here, the catalyst receives the actions of the matrix. So here's what happens, I think. I mean, obviously I'm distorted, so I'm already wrong. When you make a decision to do something, or to act in some way, or to engage in some way, the world, that is your significator, a well-informed significator that has come through all of the unconscious different archetypes into the potentiator, into the matrix. Your significator says, okay, let's do something. And when you and I do an action out there, not only is that a catalyst, because you're doing something, you're creating a catalyst in the universe, but you're going to cause other people to have catalysts because of your catalyst, positive or negative. And whatever action you do, that immediately, as a catalyst that you create for yourself, goes right on into the experience archetype. So there is it goes right on into, it's a catalyst itself. So whatever action you do becomes a catalyst for your further growing. Remember I told you everything in the conventional world, you can find this in the conventional world? Because if you can't find it in the conventional world, it doesn't exist metaphysically. Just take that as true. So think about it this way. Someone who is doing a wheelchair. I'm processing it, I'm pushing it this way, but what direction am I going to? I'm going forward. So every time I do an action, I throw it out there, it's a catalyst again, so I'm putting it back into the catalyst, and that helps me move towards the transformation. You can just see these metaphors over and over again. The catalyst then, the significator makes a decision on action, it becomes a catalyst. The catalyst goes into the experience archetype. So basically you can see this guy right here, this person right here in the catalyst. Let's say that this is someone who, that's like a traffic cop. Okay, stop, this right here. No, come, and always doing this. This reaching and grabbing and giving and reaching and grabbing. This one here is like this experienced librarian. All right, probably got a lot of helpers. Because once the catalyst, an action that you do or an action that's done to you, is given to the experience archetype, that is sifted and archived in the library that forms slowly, like you collect books over your life and you start to organize them. It's exactly what happens in consciousness. Exactly. It's not found in the conventional world. It doesn't exist metaphysically. So, like you might receive 1,000 books from different seekers, but they're just in a big old pile. That would be a big old bunch of catalysts, but then you got to sort them, you got to process them, you got to make sense of how you're going to do this, and you don't know how you're going to do it until all of a sudden categories start coming out in your mind. This one was positive. This one sucked. This one is sucked, but then I learned. Do you see? And you start to make these biases, which become different shelves on the library. And you got a librarian doing this in the experience catalyst. That's the point of the experience catalyst. Then the experience catalyst gives it right back to, the experience archetype gives it back to the catalyst archetype. So the catalyst archetype is like in the center. And it's just this flow.
Can you tell me again how the experience gives information to the catalyst? It seems like it's the other way around, but you're saying both ways.
It's both. And Ra talks about it when you start to, when you start to look at even physics, something that is negative, magnetically speaking, it's negative macroly, but even in a negative or positive thing, there's always positive and negative sub in it. There's negative and positive because there's a current. It always has to be macro negative, macro positive, and inside that is negative positive. Negative positive. So that creates this current. So there's always a positive aspect to the catalyst or a negative aspect to the catalyst in all of the archetypes.
I'm understanding that the experience informs the catalyst so that the potentiator can start to cycle. So the catalyst creates experience, but then we've got all this deep mind, right present time experience that when something comes out, they make catalyst positive or negative, which makes the potentiator start the process all over.
So you can think of the potentiator as the engine. It draws in to get the whole process started. And where is it going to give all of this energy? It's going to give it to the matrix, to the conscious mind. But who's going to make a decision to do what with what? The significator, because significator is the archetype of meaning making, sense making. See? That's what the word significar in Latin means, in Spanish. Now,
Isn't the matrix guiding on behalf of the significator?
Ra says that the event is recorded by the matrix, but acted upon, I can't remember, I have it here somewhere, acted upon by the significator. So that's why I paired the significator with the matrix together, because the matrix is the conscious mind, but what part of the conscious mind makes decisions of what to do?
Okay, so significator is, I'm a software background, so I see the significator as the main function.
Mm-hmm.
And the significator is the one which, based on reacts of the external world.
Yes.
And basically cause function.
Causes function?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I'm the significator and I receive something I call the catalyst.
Yeah.
Which is going to process the function. I'm going to use my matrix and I'm going to use
my matrix to have an experience based on that function.
Right.
That experience I'm going to basically store it and decide what I'm going to do as a main function later with my reaction to this area also.
I mean, I maybe didn't hear you well, but I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm trying to say what you just said. I'm trying to say that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's
But you said it better.
because
So.
the significator is the center, which is used as
Right. It is. It is.
rather than
Ultimately,
the
it's the metaphysically, it's the center. Ross says this is what is the permanent personality that gets passed. But I'm talking diagram here, brother.
No, I because I understood that the catalyst is the center.
No, but in order for the significator to even know what the heck to do, there has to be a sense of being changed by an external force or even internal force. An archetype is a specific quantized packet of energetics that is responsible for one role in consciousness. So for the significator to do what it does, it has to have all of the other archetypes. But the significator doesn't just sit. It would be like being in a wheelchair where you're doing your things, but you're not going anywhere. That's not what the significator does. The whole process moves forward. And what moves forward is when a person becomes aware of the evolutionary nature of our third density vibratory experience. Ross says that when a third density being becomes aware that there is such a thing as evolution of mind and spirit, even at an unconscious level, and there is a choice of polarity, that becomes, let's say, octane gas being put into the engine of the whole mind-body-spirit complex. Before it was white gas. I'm trying to get a polarity. I don't know. I'm making decisions. But once you make a decision, there's actually kind of crystallization or activation that happens. And I have the polarity with the experience, and I want you to almost see it like this, and it's pulling forward. Okay? Because the polarity, now, it will get paired by the significator in a second. But let's see here. The polarity, now all of a sudden, you have fired or gotten into better training, the old librarian. Because the old librarian was sorting stuff, but man, he came in there and was like, you know what, we need to digitalize this. No more Dewey Decimal System. And all of a sudden, so you bring in a polarity, and it automatically starts to sift things into accordance to the energetics of the polarity that you have chosen. The new librarian is an upgrade from Word 2012 to 2000, whatever we're at now, 22. Okay? And it's much more efficient. It moves us quickly. Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like I read in the raw material that the matrix, just in the mind, that it asks for certain experiences of the potentiator, and the potentiator, which is like the high priestess, provides that experience. So there is some sense of agency within the matrix.
That's right. Remember I said that even if you're entirely, let's say, male principal archetype, that at the sub level, think of each archetype as an atom. But what makes an atom? Subatomic particles. Remember, if it's not found in the conventional world, it doesn't exist metaphysically. Or a molecule is made up of different atoms. Regardless, there is a positive and negative even within the positive. So the negative part and the positive part work where the matrix reaches for the potentiator.
I guess I'm trying to say is like they're like within, because I'm thinking like the first four parts.
Yep.
In the order that they provided, like the matrix has agency and it so if the matrix or the potentiator provides, from intelligent infinity provides you the experience or this catalyst and experience, and it reaches the significator when finally there's growth. I mean, that's how I was looking at it. So I was trying to match it with your model, but I feel like the significator in your diagram it seemed to me like that it had all the agency. Like,
it has the agency to make decisions. Yes. But the potentiator is unmoving. That's what Ross says. The matrix is unmoving. Even though it's a male principal archetype. The potentiator is a female principal archetype, yet that's what moves. It's a paradox. And it moves towards the matrix because the matrix is moving towards it. There is a consummation that happens, and that's how information is given. And then that goes from the matrix, which is the conscious mind. Some archetypes got to make a decision of what to do with it. There's got to be a part of you that stores the information and grows. And that's the significator. That's why Ross says it is the heart of the individual. So there's a way in which I could draw it right in the middle. But to make it so that you can see that it's more of the head that makes the decisions of what did I do, that's why I put it in here. And you'll see it in a second when I get real clever about it. But yeah, keep asking questions when I
have one. So in essence, if the matrix is the male and we're calling the potentiator the female, right? Could you even go so much as, because it's not as much of a paradox if the male is reaching and the potentiator is awaiting the reach, right? But could you also extrapolate from that the potentiator is sending energy, like when they consummate, sending energy to the matrix, which causes the significator's action, and vice versa?
Yeah.
There's that revelation that goes backwards, or the.
But it's the male the matrix does reach, but it also awaits the reach from the potentiator. It's both. Just like if you have an attraction to somebody else that has more of a different principle than you, the male or female principle, you are attracted, but there's an interchange, there's an exchange. So it's just like that.
Sorry, but in broad terms, can you help me grasp better the potentiator? So for instance, matrix, I can in broad terms say that's the conscious mind. Catalyst speaks for itself, it's all that assaults the senses. Significator, you're explaining for me beautifully, thank you. But potentiator, I don't like what's the analogy in our psychology?
Can I suggest a much simpler analogy that made this comprehensible for me? The matrix is the raw material, for example, marble. Potentiator is what acts on that, for example, the sculptor, and the significator is the sculpture. When I looked at it in those terms, the scales fell off.
What did you say the potentiator was?
The sculptor. So if you look at matrix as the marble, potentiator as the sculptor, and significator as the finished sculpture.
Okay. If that works for you, you got to run with that.
It,
and maybe that'll work for somebody else.
Sort of, I just got an image. Potentiator to me is kind of like the ocean.
Uh-huh.
It's dark, you can only see the surface, but there's a lot going on.
Okay.
And the matrix is kind of like a fisherman reaching for what's in there.
Good. Where does the desire to fish come from? But where does the desire to fish come from?
Significator.
Okay, but it's also the potentiator. The potentiator calls the fisherman to fish. But who makes the decision to fish? That's the significator.
I've had the feeling that the potentiator's major role is to bias the catalyst that the matrix experiences so it will see it in a certain fashion congruent with pre-incarnated choices. And so that's the way that the catalyst can be enhanced and utilized and fed then into the experience so that it's stored for future use. and then all of that stored experience becomes a significator, which is the significant self. I think that's basically what you're saying.
Okay, that would be another model that would work. But I think but that's still a nuanced model from even what Ra was saying, from my perspective. Because the Ra, if you want just the guts of what consciousness would look like in a veiled experience, you have to have no more and no less these 7 archetypes. You have to have a sense of the catalyst. Otherwise, you would just be in a coma. There's no growth at all. You wouldn't even be conscious. There's got to be something that catalyzes you to move somewhere. Got to have it. You got to have an area that sifts the catalyst. Ross says that's the experience archetype.
Experience is, I kind of understand what Jim is saying, because for the experience is limited to incarnation. We cannot bring experience as an experience from when you actually incarnate. You bring it in a potentiator,
right,
as a bias.
So there's another model that we're going to see here in a few minutes, hopefully, that actually positions all of this from an iceberg, and then it will be more like what you said.
Doug, can you finish that thought? You just said, starting with the catalyst, you have to have catalyst to grow, and then before the question, you were kind of
So you double-clicked on me. In order for there to in order for catalysts to start to make sense and to create a bias, you have to have an archive. That's experience. Okay? Then if you want to think of, this is why I did have it in this particular fashion, is that if you think of a Russian nesting doll, again, a top layer would be the potentiator. All of this goes inside the potentiator. It is true, and we're going to see that when we do the, because it's all, these 3 are unconscious. The archipelago of the deeper mind, they're unconscious, but I'm pulling them out of, I'm separating the Russian nesting doll so you can see them, and then we're going to put them back together. Does that help?
I see it as like an oil refinery, making fuel for the matrix to be able to.
Yeah.
The matrix can comprehend.
At first, you have to have fuel.
Yeah.
And then you got to know how to refine it.
From the experience and catalyst.
That's right.
Yeah.
So in order for consciousness to go, then you have to have a potentiator. Because what are you going to do with all of this sifted knowledge? Or the word gnosis, which means lived experiential knowledge. That's what gnosis is. What are you going to do with it? Well, there needs to be a catalyst, an energetic quanta that is responsible for making this attractive for the matrix to reach for. The maiden in the castle, or whatever archetype you want to think of. Then the matrix is moved by this attraction, the conscious mind, and the significator directs the matrix to do something in the world. Okay? But ultimately, when you die from this lifetime, what goes? It's the significant self. It's the significator replete with all of the experience here, all of the gained knowledge, all of that. It gets put into another body, and all of that experience that you gained then it's like all of that Russian nesting dolls gets packaged up in that whole thing, the whole Russian nesting doll with all 9 levels or whatever. That's called the permanent self, the significator, the significant self that goes from incarnation to incarnation. But then you come out as Victor, and all of them are separated again. We'll get a new experience, a new catalyst, a new potential. They're all brand new and polished. And then immediately they're filled with the experience that you just had. Okay? And then that moves. That's a catalyst. Is that not a catalyst? If the experience that you just had is a catalyst. to do what? It moves through the potentiator, which then activates and moves into the matrix. So when you're a baby and you just come out of the womb, you're like, snap, I want to go back in there. Well, that's a catalyst based on the experience you just had, which is really nice and warm inside. And I'm going to come out, and my immediate matrixy self is going to want to go, ah! And who made the matrix do that was your significator. So the significator, it's like all of these things go inside the significator, you die, it gets all processed, and then when you're ready for another incarnation, they all get spread out again. That's how I see it.
One more question. Shouldn't the transformation be worked on in here?
It's right here.
Oh, good.
So the choice of polarity becomes the bias which prompts the experience archetype to sift experience through a positive polarity base or a negative polarity base. Then as the experience archetype feeds the catalyst to the potentiator, so there's that flow, the significator has an increasingly biased lens through which to make decisions. I put that as the glasses, because that's the lens. The experience becomes a lens for the significator to make decisions on how to act, and we're all products of our own biases. So, for example, if someone, and I know a lot of people like this, especially when I worked in the disclosure movement, but also in my clients, if someone has a sense in their own experience catalyst of us versus them, the negative and positive with stark differentiation, or a sense of trauma maybe in childhood where there was significant social justice done unto me, let's say. All of those things are going to create a certain bias. And then that will be the lens through which we will look at everything. Because you can have a beautiful day, and you look up there and it's a beautiful day, and someone else will say, yeah, I see this beautiful day, but those chemtrails right there are kicking my ass. That's the bias. You see? Not saying the bias is right or wrong, I'm just saying that's the lenses. And what ends up happening is the more and more bias we have that is informed by our polarity, the polarity we choose, what direction are we going to? Forward. And that's transformation. Transformation is the movement forward based upon the more and more biases we have, and we're working on them hardcore. The word ihidaya was the word that they gave for Jesus. The Aramaic word for leader was ihidaya. They called him ihidaya. Ihidaya is Aramaic for the single one, the pure of heart. It doesn't mean just don't think of a sexual thought. That's not what pure of heart means. It means single pointed in one direction, and you're choosing that. You're putting all your eggs in that basket. That's ihidaya, the single one. We're all called to be ihidayas. So, that's the other archetype, is that once all of this machine is working well, you got to go some direction. That's transformation. That's the transformation archetype. And whatever degree you transform is the degree the infinite creator is transforming in you, through you, and as you. Let me show you this little nifty thing. This is why it's in this particular. This is why I put it in this particular thing, because it's actually, the carriage. You see, the two horses in front would be like the fool and the experience archetype running. Catalyst would be one wheel. Potentiator is another wheel. The body of the person would be the matrix. What makes the decision is the significator. Which direction is the whole carriage going? Forward. But what are the reins? Now, this is actually in the law of one. It's subtle, and you have to look at it. But later on in the sessions, like 101 or something like that, Ra insinuates that what are the reins that connect the horses to the rider? Will and faith. Will and faith. And you can almost pair will with the original thought. Remember I told you it's only the original thought and the original desire. The original thought is to experience. So the will is outward, and faith is to trust that it actually does something and means something. So for example, like when you were saying yesterday, you had the will to seek something different in your life. You willed something different by moving away from that job you had. But you had the faith that it would mean something. And that will and faith is the reins that you're being drawn forward, and it connects to your experience, archetype, and the polarity, because what you were doing didn't resonate so well with the polarity that you've chosen. And the more bias that you have, the more positive I want to be, the more service to others I want to be, well, then your horses get faster and faster. And what's the reins that are holding you on is the will and faith. Come on. Will to make a change, the faith that it makes a difference. And that is actually what speeds up transformation. See? That's why all 7 of these archetypes have to be there in order for the one infinite creator to not only, both as a macro one infinite creator, but the micro you as a sub-logos, is you have to have this ability to not only have experience and be catalyzed towards experience, then to choose a bias, and then to say, I'm going to do everything I do according to the bias that I've chosen, the polarity I've chosen. And that algorithm creates forward movement. And then the more will you have to do that forward movement, and the faith that your forward movement is actually going somewhere, even when you can't see it, when you do that, it speeds up the horses. Okay? Well, we just talked about the catalyst of mind. There's the catalyst of spirit, but it will be, it's in the link, and you can look at that also. It's unfortunate I didn't get a chance to actually talk about that. But how this looks out for you, let me just spend 1 minute on what this might look like for you. Start to become aware, as I have. Now, everybody's going to have their own experience. Almost as bubbles. I see it almost as bubbles. Like I've got a experience bubble that's like right here. And I've got a potentiator bubble I always feel like it's right here. It's inside me. And I've got a matrix bubble that's maybe it's right here. And I've got a significator bubble that's right here. And I feel this flow. And the way I know I'm being transformed is nothing I can prove to you, but it's more of a sense of being used more and more as a crystallizing. I'm never going to say I'm crystallized because I know my faults. I'm never going to say that. But a crystallizing being more and more, and you can see that this is in the efficaciousness of my talking and working with other people, their ability to grow and my ability to be a mirror is how I know I'm being transformed. Okay? So, and I have the will and faith to do it. I have the faith that my actions actually will lead to transformation. Well, I probably maybe even distorted your view even more. Sorry.
No,
but,
so you didn't. It's good.
Okay.
It's good.
But it is all in. I've already talked about this actually in my. That's the last thing I wanted to say is that I have a spiritual group called Building Forth. It's Building Forth Chakra, Building Forth Density, and Building Forth and Transformation, Building Forth on our way. I know we're punny that way. But I'm inviting anybody If you'd like to, we meet on Tuesday nights via Zoom at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we talk about these things. Sometimes we talk about the material, but it's always the law of one, because often we talk about counseling principles. So I just finished a series on self-esteem, self-compassion, and the metaphysics of the law of one and how they feed each other. Okay? But if you're interested, at the end when we get everybody's email, you can email me, and I'd be happy to include you in our little community that we have. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, have a seat. Over the next 10 minutes, I would like to invite you to focus on the present.
I really enjoyed that.
Okay.
I love the way you could generalize and make it more available to people.